The pen was inches from the paper when the maid's voice shattered Lorenzo Valenti's world. And 4 words saved an empire. Don't sign that document. She thought she could fade back into invisibility, back to serving tea and polishing silver. She thought he wouldn't remember the face of the woman who had just stolen his wife's victory. She was wrong. Because in the world of power, loyalty is currency, and Christy Holmes had just made herself invaluable. 2 hours after she stopped his signature, the most powerful businessman in the city looked up from the evidence of his wife's betrayal and made a call that would change everything. Get Richard Holmes on the line, now, and someone tell me everything about Christy Holmes. And he didn't mean for a reference check. Please stay with me, you will love the story. Like and share this video so that others can see it, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, so you don't miss the next story. Christy Holmes had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. It was a Thursday morning and she moved through the Valenti estate like a ghost in a maid's uniform. Black dress, white apron, hair pulled back in a neat bun that her mother would have called common. 6 months ago, Christy had been preparing for the opening of her own bistro in Soho. Now she polished silver in a mansion that belonged to a man who had never once looked her in the eye. She preferred it that way. The library smelled of leather and old money, the kind of room that existed to be photographed for architecture magazines rather than used. Christy ran her cloth along the spines of first editions that had never been opened. Books bought by the yard to fill empty spaces between windows that overlooked manicured gardens. Her cart held fresh linens for the reading chairs, new candles for the sconces, and the particular brand of sparkling water that Adriana Valenti demanded be available in every room. Adriana. The second Mrs. Valenti, 29 and beautiful in the way that required a team of professionals to maintain. She'd walked past Christy in the hallway that morning without a flicker of recognition, already on her phone, her Louboutin clicking against marble like a countdown. Christy replaced the water bottles in the small refrigerator hidden behind a panel of false books. This was her life now. Restocking, refreshing, remaining unseen. Her father didn't know she was here. Richard Holmes would have a stroke if he discovered his daughter was cleaning houses instead of running her own kitchen. But that was the point. She'd taken out loans against her name, not his. When her investor had pulled out 2 weeks before opening, when the debts had piled up faster than she could manage, she'd made a choice. Her pride, her problem. The Valenti household paid well and asked few questions. The agency had been thrilled to place a Le Cordon Bleu graduate, even if they didn't understand why she wanted the position. Christy was reaching for the upper shelves when she heard the door to the adjacent study open. Male voices, low and confident. She froze, cloth in hand, suddenly aware that she wasn't supposed to be here during Lorenzo's afternoon meetings. The contracts are perfect. He won't see it coming. That was Victor Kane, Lorenzo's business partner. Christy had served them lunch twice, noted the expensive watch, the calculating smile. And you're certain about the timeline? A woman's voice. Adriana. Christy's breath caught. She should leave, should make noise, announce her presence, anything, but stand here listening to a conversation that had the weight of conspiracy in every syllable. Once he signs tomorrow, the transfer is irreversible. The divorce papers are buried in Clause 7. His lawyers will be reviewing documents for months before they find them. By then, the shipping empire will be ours, and Lorenzo Valenti will be exactly what he deserves to be. Nothing. Adriana laughed, and the sound made Christy's blood run cold. The abuse allegations? Already documented. Witnesses prepared. Even his reputation won't survive this. Christy's hand tightened on the leather binding of a book she'd been dusting. Through the crack in the door, she could see them. Adriana and Victor standing too close, their conspiracy written in every calculated gesture. She thought of Lorenzo Valenti, the man who walked past her every morning without seeing her. The man whose empire was about to be stolen by the woman who shared his bed. Christy Holmes had spent 6 months being invisible. Tomorrow, she would have to decide if she could live with staying that way. Tomorrow came faster than Christy expected. She'd barely slept, replaying the conversation she'd overheard until the words became a nightmare loop. By morning, she'd convinced herself to stay silent. It wasn't her business. It wasn't her world. Lorenzo Valenti had lawyers, advisors, people whose job it was to protect him from exactly this kind of betrayal. But when she arrived at the estate and saw Adriana descending the staircase in a cream Chanel suit, smile perfectly painted, phone already pressed to her ear, probably to Victor, Christy felt something crack inside her chest. Her father had raised her to stand for something, even when it cost everything. At 2 o'clock, she was assigned to refresh the coffee service in Lorenzo's study. Her hands shook as she arranged the cups, the sterling silver spoons catching fractured light from the chandelier. Lorenzo sat at his desk, the same documents from yesterday spread before him. 40 pages of betrayal disguised as business. Adriana swept in moments later, pressing a kiss to his temple that made Christy's stomach turn. "Don't forget to sign those merger papers there, darling. Victor needs them by end of day." "I know." Lorenzo's voice was distracted, already absorbed in the fine print. Adriana's eyes flicked to Christy, dismissive, then away. She left in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and lies. Christy poured coffee with mechanical precision. Lorenzo reached for his Mont Blanc pen, the same pen that had nearly signed yesterday. This time there would be no interruption, no reason for him to pause, except her. The pen touched paper. "Don't sign that document." The words left Christy's mouth before her mind could stop them. 4 words that shattered 6 months of invisibility. Lorenzo's hand froze. His head turned slowly, dark eyes finding her with the precision of a predator identifying prey. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "What did you say?" Christy's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The silver coffee pot trembled in her hands. She could take it back, apologize, disappear back into the safety of being nobody. But she thought of Clause 7, the abuse allegations, the empire about to be stolen. "I said don't sign it, Mr. Valenti." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Not unless you want to lose everything you've built." Lorenzo set the pen down with deliberate care. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "And how," he said, each word precisely enunciated, "would a maid know anything about my business documents?" The question was a blade. Christy forced herself to meet his eyes, really meet them, for the first time since she'd started working here. They were darker than she'd realized, intelligent and utterly unforgiving. "Because I heard your wife and Victor Kane yesterday in the library." Christy's voice dropped. "They were planning this. The merger is fake. Clause 7 contains divorce papers with fabricated abuse allegations. They're going to take everything, the shipping empire, this house, your reputation, all of it." Lorenzo went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "You're saying my wife is conspiring to rob me?" "Yes." "With my business partner?" "Yes." "And you overheard this conversation?" His tone made it sound absurd, the paranoid fantasy of an over-imaginative servant. Christy lifted her chin. "I was restocking the library. They didn't know I was there. They never know I'm there. That's the point of people like me, Mr. Valenti. We're invisible." Something flickered in his expression. Not belief, not yet, but curiosity. "Tell me," Lorenzo said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "Exactly what you heard, word for word. And if you're wasting my time, or if this is some scheme of your own, I promise you'll regret the day you decided to speak." Christy took a breath and began to repeat the conversation that would either save an empire or destroy her completely. Lorenzo Valenti didn't believe in coincidences. He'd dismissed Christy immediately after her recitation, his face an unreadable mask. She'd returned to the servants' quarters with shaking hands and the certainty that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. By evening, she expected to be fired. By midnight, she expected worse. What she didn't expect was to be summoned to Lorenzo's study at 7 the next morning. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the dawn, a file folder open on his desk. When he turned, his expression was different from yesterday, still calculating, but with a new edge of something that might have been respect. Christy Elizabeth Holmes. He said her full name like he was reading charges. Born in Manhattan. Graduated top of your class from Le Cordon Bleu. Took out $200,000 in loans to open a restaurant in Soho. He paused. And then your investor pulled out and you disappeared. Christie's blood ran cold. How did you... I own a shipping empire, Miss Holmes. I don't survive this long by taking people at face value. Lorenzo closed the folder. What I couldn't understand was why a chef with your credentials would be cleaning houses, until I found the connection. He lifted a photograph from his desk. Christie's breath stopped. It was her father, younger, standing outside a courthouse. Richard Holmes, one of the finest corporate lawyers in the country. Also, if I'm not mistaken, your father. Lorenzo's dark eyes pinned her in place. You're not just a maid, are you? You're a lawyer's daughter running from her own pride. Christie forced herself to breathe. My father doesn't know I'm here. I didn't want his help. I still don't. Unfortunately for you, you're going to get it anyway. Lorenzo picked up his phone. Because if what you told me yesterday is true, I need testimony from someone I can verify. Someone with credibility. He began dialing. And Richard Holmes's daughter has considerably more credibility than a random member of my household staff. Wait. Christie started forward, but Lorenzo held up a hand. Mr. Holmes, this is Lorenzo Valenti. I apologize for the early call, but I believe we have a mutual interest to discuss. A pause. Yes, that Valenti. No, this isn't about shipping contracts. This is about your daughter. Christie watched her carefully constructed independence crumble in real time. Lorenzo's conversation was brief, professional, and devastating. When he hung up, he looked at Christie with something approaching sympathy. He'll be here in 2 hours. He's also extremely displeased that you've been working as a maid for 6 months while he thought you were consulting for a restaurant group in Boston. I never said Boston. Lies of omission are still lies, Miss Holmes. Lorenzo moved to his desk, began pulling files. But right now, I don't care about your family drama. I care about whether you're telling the truth about my wife. I am. Then here's what's going to happen. Lorenzo's voice dropped to the tone of a man issuing commands, not requests. You're going to repeat everything you heard to your father. He's going to advise me on the legal implications. And in the meantime, you're under my protection. Protection from what? Lorenzo's expression darkened. From Adriana and Victor. If they discover you're the reason I haven't signed, you become a liability. And people who threaten $800 million don't tend to survive their liability status. The words hung between them like a death sentence. So I'm a prisoner now. Christie's voice came out sharper than intended. You're a witness, Lorenzo corrected, and possibly the only reason my empire will still exist next week. Consider it a promotion. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Miss Holmes. Your father will want you alive when he arrives, and I intend to make sure that happens. Christie sat, her world tilting on an axis she no longer controlled, and waited for her father to discover exactly how far she'd fallen while trying to stand on her own. The study became their war room. Richard Holmes had arrived, embraced his daughter with the kind of controlled fury only a parent could manage, then spent 3 hours with Lorenzo, mapping legal strategy. By the time he left, Christie had been reassigned from maid to whatever role required her to spend every evening combing through documents alongside a man who now knew exactly how much her pride had cost her. Clause 7, Lorenzo said for the 3rd time that night, pushing the merger contract across the desk. Show me where the language shifts. It was past midnight. The household staff had retired hours ago, but Christie and Lorenzo remained, the study lit only by the desk lamp that cast shadows across his face. He'd shed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and Christie had discovered that Lorenzo Valenti without his armour was somehow more dangerous than the polished businessman who'd never looked at her twice. She leaned forward, finger tracing the paragraph. Here, transfer of marital assets in accordance with prenuptial amendment, subsection 4. But there is no subsection 4 in your prenup. I checked. Your father confirmed it. Which means this creates it. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Retroactive modification buried in contract language. Victor's specialty. Their hands were close on the document, close enough that Christie could feel the heat from his skin. She pulled back, professional distance reasserting itself. Lorenzo noticed. He noticed everything. "Tell me about the restaurant," he said suddenly, leaning back in his chair. "The one you were going to open." Christie blinked at the shift. "That's not relevant to Humour me. We've been reading contract language for 4 hours. I need 5 minutes where the words don't all blur together." She hesitated, then surrendered. It was called Sage. Small, 40 seats. The menu changed daily based on what was fresh. What inspired me that morning. I wanted people to trust me enough to just let me cook for them. "And your investor?" "Got nervous when the neighbourhood started gentrifying slower than projected. Pulled out 2 weeks before opening." Christie's voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened on the contract. "I'd already signed the lease, hired staff, ordered equipment. The debt came fast." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You could have asked your father for help." "I could have. I didn't want to." "Because?" "Because I needed to prove I could do something that was mine. Not his connections, not his money, mine." She met his eyes. "You understand that, don't you? Everything you've built, someone's trying to take it because they think you won't see them coming, that you'll trust the wrong people." Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. "Is that why you spoke up? Because you understood what it meant to lose something you'd built?" Christie hadn't thought about it that way, but yes, that was exactly why. "Maybe," she said quietly. Lorenzo stood, moved to the window overlooking the gardens. "My father gave me my first warehouse when I was 22. Everyone said I'd run it into the ground within a year, that I was too young, too arrogant, too American for the old European shipping families to take seriously." He turned back to her. "I turned that warehouse into an empire out of spite, just to prove I could. And now your wife wants to take it." "My wife," Lorenzo said with precise bitterness, "never cared about the empire. She cared about the lifestyle it provided. Victor convinced her she could have both without me." Christie saw it then, beneath the ruthless businessman. Beneath the commands and the calculated control was someone who understood betrayal the way she understood failure. Intimately. Personally. "We'll find the proof," she said. "The real documentation, whatever they're hiding." Lorenzo's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You sound certain." "I am. Because people like Adriana and Victor make mistakes when they think no one's watching. They get comfortable, sloppy." Christie gathered the contracts. "And they definitely didn't count on someone like me paying attention." "No," Lorenzo agreed, his dark eyes holding hers. "I don't think anyone counted on you, Christie Holmes." The way he said her name, not Miss Holmes, not the maid, just Christie, made something dangerous bloom in her chest. She should have recognized it for what it was, the beginning of a different kind of trouble, entirely. Adriana Valenti noticed everything about appearances and nothing about substance. But even she couldn't miss that the maid was spending an unusual amount of time in her husband's study. Christie was reviewing bank transfers when Adriana appeared in the doorway, her expression perfectly composed except for the tightness around her eyes. It was 10 in the morning, and Christie had been working since dawn, still wearing yesterday's clothes because she'd fallen asleep at Lorenzo's desk around 3 a.m. "I wasn't aware we'd hired you as office staff," Adriana said, her voice silk wrapped around steel. Christie looked up from the documents, suddenly aware of how this appeared. Rumpled clothes, intimate access to Lorenzo's private space, the coffee cups for 2 on the side table, the perfect recipe for exactly the wrong conclusion. "Mrs. Valenti, I'm just what? Reviewing my husband's confidential business documents?" Adriana stepped into the study, her Hermes heels clicking like a countdown. "I've been patient with Lorenzo's eccentricities, but this is inappropriate. You're fired. Pack your things and be gone within the hour." The command was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone used to being obeyed. Christy felt the familiar instinct to apologize, to disappear, to make herself invisible again. But she wasn't invisible anymore. "I don't think that's your decision to make," Christy said quietly. Adriana's eyes flashed. "Excuse me? The household staff report to you, yeah? But I don't work for the household anymore." "Really?" Adriana's tone could have frozen water. "And who exactly do you work for?" "Me." Both women turned to find Lorenzo in the doorway, his presence filling the space like a storm front. He moved into the study with deliberate calm, positioning himself beside Christy in a gesture that was unmistakably protective. "Christy is no longer employed as household staff," Lorenzo said. "As of 3 days ago, she's been retained as a special consultant on a private business matter. She reports directly to me." Christy watched Adriana's face cycle through surprise, suspicion, and, finally, calculation. A consultant? How convenient. And what exactly is she consulting on? "Contract review," Lorenzo said smoothly. "Given her background in restaurant management and her fresh perspective on business operations, I've found her insights valuable." It was a masterful lie, close enough to truth to be believable, vague enough to be useless. Christy kept her expression neutral, but inside, she marveled at how easily deception came to him. Adriana's gaze moved between them, sharp and assessing. "I see. And this consultation requires her to spend nights in your study? Alone with you?" The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but Christy felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "What my business consultations require is none of your concern, Adriana. Christy's employment is a company matter, not a household one. If you have questions about how I run my business, you're welcome to raise them with my board of directors. Otherwise, I suggest you redirect your energy toward the charity luncheon you're hosting this afternoon." It was dismissal wrapped in civility, and they all knew it. Adriana's smile was perfectly controlled, but Christy saw the fury beneath it. "Of course, I wouldn't dream of interfering with your business, darling." She turned that cold smile on Christy. "Though I do hope your consultation proves worthwhile." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained rage. The moment the door closed, Christy exhaled. "She knows something's wrong. She knows I'm paying attention to you. That's enough to make her suspicious." Lorenzo moved to the window, his jaw tight. "We need to move faster. If Adriana alerts Victor that I'm having the contracts reviewed, they'll change their timeline," Christy finished. "Push the signing or find another way to execute the plan." "Exactly." Lorenzo turned back to her, and Christy saw the strategist beneath the businessman. "Your father's working on the legal framework to freeze their assets once we have proof. But we need that proof before they realize we're hunting for it." Christy thought of Adriana's face, the calculation in her eyes. "How long do you think we have?" "Days. Maybe hours." Lorenzo's expression was grim. "Which means we work through the night if we have to. Can you handle that?" Christy met his eyes, saw the question beneath the question. Could she handle the danger, the long hours, the way Adriana now viewed her as a threat? Could she handle whatever was growing between them in these late-night hours? "I'm not going anywhere," Christy said. Lorenzo's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Good, because I'm fairly certain you're the only person in this house I can trust." The weight of that trust settled over Christy like a mantle. She'd gone from invisible to indispensable in less than a week. She just hoped she'd survive the transition. Richard Holmes arrived at the Valenti estate at dawn with a leather briefcase and the expression of a man going to war. Christy met him in the entrance hall, and for a moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other. She saw the disappointment in his eyes. Not that she'd failed, but that she'd thought she had to face failure alone. We'll discuss your employment choices later, Richard said quietly, pulling her into a brief embrace. Right now, we have an empire to save. Lorenzo appeared at the top of the stairs, already dressed, despite the early hour. Mr. Holmes, thank you for coming. Let's be clear, Mr. Valenti, I'm not here for you. I'm here because my daughter asked for help, and because I don't appreciate people who weaponize the legal system for theft. Richard's tone was professional ice. Where can we work? The study became a strategic command center. Richard spread documents across every surface: the original merger contracts, corporate bylaws, prenuptial agreements, bank records Christie and Lorenzo had compiled over sleepless nights. He worked in silence for 20 minutes, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting before looking up. It's brilliant, actually. Diabolical, but brilliant. Richard tapped the merger documents. Victor Kane didn't just bury divorce papers in Clause 7. He created an entire legal framework that makes the asset transfer look voluntary. By the time your lawyers untangled it, you'd be financially devastated and facing criminal charges for domestic abuse that never happened. Lorenzo's expression was carved from stone. Can you stop it? Stop it? No. Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut. But I can turn it into a trap. Christie leaned forward. What kind of trap? The kind that requires your wife and Victor to incriminate themselves in front of witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated. Richard pulled out a fresh legal pad. Here's what we're going to do. Lorenzo, you're going to sign those documents. Excuse me. Lorenzo's voice dropped to dangerous levels. You're going to sign them, Richard continued calmly, in front of Adriana, Victor, and a notary I'll provide. But what they won't know is that I've prepared a parallel set of documents, identical except for one crucial detail. The account numbers for the asset transfer will route to a holding company I control, not Victor's corporate network. Christie saw it immediately. So when they think they're stealing the empire, they're actually creating an irrefutable paper trail of conspiracy to commit fraud, Richard finished. Complete with their signatures, their stated intentions, and their celebration of stealing $800 million. Lorenzo stood, moved to the window. When he spoke, there was something like admiration in his voice. That's not a legal strategy, that's warfare. I've been practicing corporate law for 30 years, Mr. Valenti. I know exactly what this is. Richard's expression hardened. But I need your commitment. This gambit requires perfect execution. One mistake, one tell, and they'll know it's a setup. I can act the part of a fool who didn't read his contracts. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. What do you need from me? Sell the desperation. Make Adriana believe she's won. Make Victor think you're broken. Richard looked at Christie. And you need to disappear from sight. If Adriana sees you anywhere near this signing, she'll know something's wrong. Christie felt the protest rise in her throat. After everything she'd done, everything she'd risked, she was supposed to hide while others finished what she'd started. Lorenzo must have seen it on her face. Christie stays. She's earned the right to see this through. She's earned the right to stay alive, Richard countered. Adriana already suspects her. If Christie's in that room, we lose our element of surprise. The two men stared at each other, and Christie saw the clash of wills, her father's legal precision against Lorenzo's protective instinct. He's right, Christie said quietly. Both men turned to her. If I'm there, Adriana will be watching me instead of celebrating. We need her confident, not cautious. She met Lorenzo's eyes. I'll be close, just out of sight. Lorenzo looked like he wanted to argue, but Richard was already moving forward, sketching out the timeline. The signing happens tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll have the notary in place and the recording equipment hidden. Christie, your job is to monitor from the security room. Anything seems wrong, you alert us immediately. And after they sign? Christie asked. Richard's smile was coldly satisfied. After they sign, I make a phone call to the FBI, White Collar Crimes Division. I believe they'll be very interested in a conspiracy to commit fraud, asset theft, and falsified domestic abuse allegations. Christie watched her father work, saw Lorenzo matching his strategic precision, and understood that she was witnessing something rare. Two masters of their respective worlds collaborating to dismantle an empire built on lies. Tomorrow, Adriana and Victor would think they'd won. They had no idea they were walking into a trap designed by the finest legal mind in the country, and a man who'd built an empire by always seeing betrayal coming. Except this time, the betrayal would be theirs. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the estate's formal dining room. By 1:45, Christie was positioned in the security room, watching 6 different camera angles while her heart tried to beat out of her chest. She watched Adriana arrive first, immaculate in dove-grey Valentino, her smile radiant with anticipated victory. Victor followed 10 minutes later, his handshake with Lorenzo lasting just a fraction too long. The grip of a man celebrating a conquest. "Audio check," Richard's voice came through her earpiece. He was positioned as the notary, grey suit perfectly anonymous, thick framed glasses completing the disguise. "Clear," Christie whispered back. Lorenzo took his seat at the head of the table, and Christie saw what her father had meant about selling desperation. Lorenzo looked exhausted, defeated, a man who'd fought battles he couldn't win. It was masterful acting. "Thank you both for coming," Lorenzo said, his voice heavy. "Let's get this over with." Adriana's hand touched his shoulder with full sympathy. "I know this merger wasn't easy for you, darling, but it's the right move for the company." Christie's fingers tightened on the desk edge. She wanted to scream the truth through the speakers, wanted to shatter Adriana's performance with reality. Instead, she watched, waited. Lorenzo signed the first page, then the second. Victor and Adriana exchanged a glance, quick, triumphant, damning. The cameras caught it all. "Clause 7, Richard said mildly, sliding the page forward. "Final signatures here." The moment Lorenzo's pen touched paper, the dining room doors opened. 4 men in dark suits entered, federal badges already displayed. "Nobody move," the lead agent said. "Victor Kane, Adriana Valenti, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny and falsification of legal documents." Christie watched Adriana's face transform, shock, then fury, then ice-cold calculation as she realized what had happened. "This is insane," Victor started, but Richard was already standing, removing his glasses. "Every word you've spoken in this room has been recorded. Every signature you've provided is evidence." Richard's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The account numbers in Clause 7 say they route to a holding company established specifically to document your theft. You've just signed a confession." Adriana's eyes found the cameras, then snapped to Lorenzo. "You knew, the whole time you knew." "I knew the moment someone warned me." Lorenzo's mask dropped, revealing the ruthless businessman beneath. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice my own wife plotting to destroy me?" "Who?" Adriana's voice was pure venom. "Who told you?" The security room door opened behind Christie. She turned to find Lorenzo standing there, his expression unreadable. "Show yourself," he said quietly. "You've earned this." Christie's instinct screamed to stay hidden, stay safe. But she thought of the hours in the study, the evidence they'd compiled, the moment she'd chosen justice over invisibility. She stood and followed Lorenzo down to the dining room. Adriana saw her first. Recognition flared, then rage so pure it was almost physical. "The maid. You let a maid destroy everything. I let a woman with integrity save me from a wife without any," Lorenzo corrected. He moved to stand beside Christie, a gesture of protection and partnership. "Christie Holmes heard your conspiracy. She chose to speak when she could have stayed silent. That choice saved my empire." "Christie Holmes?" Victor's face had gone pale. "Richard Holmes's daughter. You had his daughter in your house, and You never looked at the help," Christie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That was your mistake." Adriana lunged forward, but the agents caught her. You sanctimonious little, you have no idea what you've done. Do you think he'll keep you around now that you're useful? Do you think this ends with anything but you back in your maid's uniform? Actually, Lorenzo said, his hand finding the small of Christie's back, it ends with Christie as my partner, in business and… He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. Anything else she'll allow. The words hung in the air, a declaration and a promise. Adriana's laugh was brittle as broken glass. How touching. The maid gets the empire, like some pathetic fairy tale. No, Christie said quietly, watching the agents lead them toward the door. The woman who stood for something gets her life back. The people who built their future on lies lose everything. She watched them go, Adriana still fighting, Victor already calculating his legal defense, and felt the weight of the past week finally settle. It's over, Lorenzo said beside her. Christie looked up at him, saw the question in his eyes that had nothing to do with conspiracies or empires. No, she said softly. I think it's just beginning. Christie should have known it wouldn't end cleanly. Adriana and Victor had been released on bail within 6 hours. Their lawyers were that good, their connections that deep. Richard had warned them it would happen, that people with their resources rarely stayed in custody long. But he'd also assured them the evidence was ironclad, the trial inevitable. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly the cornered would run. It was 3 a.m., when Christie couldn't sleep, and found herself in Lorenzo's study, reviewing the security systems he'd taught her to monitor during their late-night evidence gathering. The estate cameras showed nothing unusual, but Christie had learned to look beyond the obvious, to check the peripheral systems Lorenzo had installed throughout his business network. That's when she saw them. The private airport Lorenzo used for business travel, 40 minutes outside the city. 2 figures moving across the tarmac toward a Gulfstream jet that shouldn't have been there. The camera angle was distant, but Christie recognized the way Adriana moved. Fluid, elegant, even in flight. Her hand was reaching for her phone before conscious thought caught up. Lorenzo answered on the first ring. Christie, what's wrong? They're running. Adriana and Victor. They're at Silverwing Airport right now, boarding a jet. Christie's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up additional camera angles. Lorenzo, there are cases. 6 of them. Large enough for 20 million in embezzled funds. Lorenzo's voice went deadly calm. I've been tracking transfers for the past 3 days. I thought I'd frozen the accounts, but Victor must have moved the money earlier. A pause, then. I'm coming to get you. 2 minutes. We should call the FBI. By the time they mobilize, that plane will be in international airspace. We go now or we lose them. The line went dead. Christie stared at the screen, watching Adriana climb the jet stairs with the confidence of someone who believed she'd won. Something hot and furious ignited in Christie's chest. This woman had tried to destroy Lorenzo, had threatened her, had built an empire of lies and expected to walk away with millions. Not tonight. Lorenzo's Aston Martin roared up to the entrance 90 seconds later. Christie ran out, barely getting the door closed before he accelerated down the long driveway. How much time do we have? Lorenzo's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Maybe 10 minutes before they're cleared for takeoff. Less if they've bribed the tower. Christie pulled up the airport feed on her phone. There's a security gate at the entrance. Not anymore. Lorenzo's smile was predatory. I own 40% of that airport. The gates will open for me. The city blurred past, streetlights becoming ribbons of gold. Lorenzo drove like he did everything else, with absolute precision and barely controlled fury. Christie gripped the door handle, watching the speedometer climb past 90, then 100. What's the plan when we get there, Wadtite? She asked. Stop them. Any way necessary. Lorenzo's jaw was set. That money represents 3 years of embezzlement. Victor's been bleeding my company dry since before he married Adriana into my life. I want every dollar, and I want them to face trial for what they've done. And if they're already in the air? Then I make phone calls to every country they might land in and ensure they're arrested the moment they touch ground. He glanced at her. something fierce in his expression. But I'd rather look Adriana in the eyes. When she realizes, she lost. The airport appeared on the horizon, small and private, designed for people who valued discretion over security. Lorenzo's car didn't slow at the entrance. The gates swung open automatically, recognition systems identifying his vehicle. They raced onto the tarmac just as the Gulfstream's engines began their high-pitched whine. Lorenzo slammed the brakes 20 feet from the jet stairs. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, Christy half a step behind. She could see movement in the jet's windows, see the pilot looking down in confusion. Then Adriana appeared in the doorway, her face transforming from surprise to rage. "You can't stop us, Lorenzo," she shouted over the engine noise. "We're on a private jet in international departure. You have no authority here." "Actually," a new voice cut through the night. "He does." Christy turned to see her father emerging from a black SUV she hadn't noticed, 2 FBI agents flanking him. Richard looked at his watch with satisfaction. "Flight plans require FAA approval, Mrs. Valenti. I took the liberty of having yours revoked 10 minutes ago," he smiled. "You're not going anywhere except into federal custody." Again. Christy watched Adriana's world crumble for the second time in 12 hours and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Some empires deserved to fall. The federal agents led Victor and Adriana through the airport terminal in handcuffs, their designer luggage abandoned at their feet. Christy watched from Lorenzo's side as the woman who'd ruled the Valenti household with velvet-gloved cruelty stumbled in her Louboutins, mascara streaking her perfect face. Victor shouted about lawyers and wrongful arrest until an agent's firm hand guided him towards the waiting vehicle. "It's over," Lorenzo said quietly, his hand finding the small of Christy's back. The touch sent electricity through her spine, no longer employer and employee, but something undefined and dangerous and thrilling. The ride back to the estate passed in silence and Christy's adrenaline crashed, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd spent 8 days living on coffee and fear, helping Lorenzo and her father dismantle the conspiracy piece by piece. Now victory felt strangely hollow, like the morning after a storm when you count what survived. Lorenzo's driver pulled into the circular driveway, but Lorenzo gave directions to continue. Christy raised questioning eyes as they drove past the mansion, through the estate gates, and into the city. "Where are we going?" "Trust me." His dark eyes held something she'd never seen before, vulnerability mixed with hope. 20 minutes later, they stopped before a warehouse in the industrial district. Lorenzo produced a key and led her inside. When he flipped the switches, Christy's breath caught. Stainless steel gleamed under industrial lights. A 6-burner range anchored the space, flanked by prep stations with marble countertops. Professional-grade refrigerators hummed against the far wall. Copper pots hung from ceiling racks. In the corner, a wood-fired pizza oven waited like a promise. "What is this?" she whispered. "Yours, if you want it." Lorenzo leaned against a counter, arms crossed, watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I've spent 3 weeks liquidating assets, securing investors, setting up an LLC. The building is purchased outright. Equipment is state-of-the-art. There's capital for staff, for inventory, for whatever you need." Christy walked slowly through the kitchen, trailing her fingers across cool metal surfaces, her vision blurred. "Lorenzo, I can't accept, not a gift, a partnership." He straightened, closing the distance between them. "You saved my empire, Christy. But more than that, you showed me what integrity looks like. I want you in my life, not as an employee, not as someone I owe, as an equal." She looked up at him, this man who'd terrified her that first day in his study. "I'm a maid with culinary school debt. You're the woman who risked everything for a stranger. You're Richard Holmes's daughter who chose her own path. You're the chef who's about to revolutionize this city's restaurant scene." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "And you're the only person I trust completely." "Lorenzo." He kissed her then, soft and searching, tasting of coffee and new beginnings. Christie's hands found his shoulders, then his hair, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled. Partners, she agreed. Partners, he confirmed and kissed her again in the kitchen that would build their future, together.